Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, What's Next at Candid. For those of you who are returning Candid webinar participants, a warm welcome back. And of course, for those of you here for the first time, we're really glad you're joining us today. My name is Jen Bokoff, and I'm the Director of Stakeholder Engagement for Candid, based remotely in Chicago. I'll be moderating the session today. And before we start, I want to extend a huge thank you to my colleagues behind the scenes, Elizabeth and Catalina, who make all of our online programs happen. They're amazing. And Adia and Candy, also amazing, who provided key communication support leading up to this. We also want to thank all of the staff who really helped to shape Candid and who give us the content to share with you today. For those of you joining us for the first time, we want to make sure that by now you know that our organization is called Candid, which you probably do because you signed up for this. Last year, Foundation Center and GuideStar joined forces in February, and we've been one happy organization since. Every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. We believe that an effective social sector is critical for a thriving society. And we believe in the importance of solutions for the sector, by the sector. With Candid, nonprofits, foundations, donors, and the public can all be on the same page. Through research, collaboration, and training, we connect people who want to change the world with the resources they need to do it. So you'll hear a lot about how we're doing that today. But before we get started, let's actually do some quick housekeeping. We've taken a screenshot of the attendee interface. So you should see something familiar on your screen. You can choose your audio, you can ask questions, you can access the handout, which is just a PDF of the presentation. And heads up, we're mostly slideless today, so that probably won't do too much good for you, but it's still there. And of course, you can type your questions into the control panel at any time. We're also recording today's presentation, and you'll get that in a follow-up email tomorrow. Our goal for today is to share more about Candid with you. We'll share where we've been and where we're going. But I want to admit that I'm not fully focused today, which I imagine is true for many of you too. The past week in our country and in the world has been particularly weighty on top of an already abnormal and scary past few months, and building on decades and centuries of complexities that are really at the very root of why our sector is so large and varied in the first place. Many of you work for organizations who are working on a mission that will make this world better, and we know the current moment is adding extra challenges. We're here at Candid in service to you, both in challenging times and in better times. In the past week, we've seen the nonprofit profiles page views for organizations like the Minnesota Freedom Fund, Innovations for Poverty Action, and the National Police Accountability Project skyrocket. People are going to check out these organizations because they want to learn and they want to give. With improved and increased information sharing, that information can then be used when it matters most. With that, I'd like to introduce our amazing speakers. So first we have Sylvester John, who is our amazing board chair. We are so lucky to have him. He comes to us from Walmart and actually worked with Zohra in a previous life, so that's a fun connection. Next we have Brad Smith, who's our president at Candid. And then finally, we have Zohra Zori, who is the Vice President for Networks. So welcome, Sylvester, Brad, and Zohra. Thank you all for taking the time today to join us. And Brad, I want to start with you. I'm actually going to stop sharing slides so that everyone can see your faces. So Brad, I initially had wanted to ask you to tell us about the process of how GuideStar and Foundation Center came together to become Candid last year. But I think actually the more relevant question I want to ask today is why? Why does Candid matter to the sector and beyond? And I want to just ask you to come off of mute as well, Brad. Please, right, thank you.
Yeah, rule number one. Thanks, Jen. But before answering your question, I just wanted to share that I really had second thoughts about going ahead with this webinar, given what's going on in the nation, at this very moment. I think no matter what words you use to describe the killing of George Floyd by a white police officer in Minnesota, tragic, brutal, abhorrent, senseless, they're simply not enough. In our homes, in our workplaces, across the nation, people are scared, frustrated, angry, and fed up. At Candid, we live by our core values. We are driven, we're accessible, we're direct, we're curious, and importantly, we're inclusive. Putting an end to racism here in the United States and in the world is going to require nonprofits and foundations to step up in ways they'd never imagined before. Candid's values drive us to track, analyze, and publish information about the diversity of our own organization and all the organizations in the sector and the communities we serve. That information will be painful and controversial at times, but it's really the only way for our sector to move forward, and we have to recognize where and how we have fallen short in order to do better. So getting to your question, and that is part of the reason we came together as Candid. We are two organizations, or were two organizations, I should say, GuideStar and Foundation Center, that probably the best way to think of it is that we worked two sides of the same street. Since 1956, Foundation Center had collected information on foundations and tracked the grants that they made to nonprofit organizations. Also interesting, Foundation Center was born during McCarthyism, another dark time in our country's history when foundations were being investigated by the US Congress for supporting un-American activities. GuideStar was created in the midst of the civil rights movement and did the other side of the street. It took the information about nonprofits, put it online, so for the first time people could see the sector, it was visible online, and really make informed choices about where to make their donations. So putting these two organizations together, we created the largest social sector treasure of data in the world. And that data not only is limited to the US, but increasingly it's tracking the sector in many other countries around the world. We also believe that persistent problems require long-term solutions. And those solutions have to be anchored in data and cumulative knowledge about what the sector has learned. One of the biggest problems we have in the sector is that knowledge really doesn't circulate very freely. If someone is looking to start a new foundation or new nonprofit organization, they have a lot of difficulty learning what the many donors and the many nonprofits before them have already learned about what works and what doesn't in the same issue. So we're constantly reinventing the wheel, and the issues we're working on, whether they be racism or climate change, persistent poverty, whatever, those issues require all of our attention and all of our effort. And we have to learn from the past, and we have to have good data. We are, for nonprofits, we offer a streamlined space to share their work through, Jen referred to these before, nonprofit profiles. These are profiles that organizations claim on the guidestar.org website. They fill them out about information. They fill information out about themselves, their programs, their goals, their outputs, their outcomes, their own demographic information. And as I said before, this information can be sensitive and controversial. Just minutes, literally minutes before coming onto this call, we were dealing with an angry customer who resented the fact that in order to fill out a profile, the organization had to include information about the diversity of their staff. For foundations, we offer a way for foundations to know what other foundations are doing, who they're funding, who else is working on their issue, who's doing what where, which are the fundamental questions for our sector. And outside of the sector, those of us in philanthropy, sometimes we live in a bubble. And I think if any of us, back in the days when we could go out on the street, we can't right now, But when we could go out in the street and you wanted to strike up a conversation about philanthropy, it probably wouldn't go very far. If you wanted to strike up a conversation about jobs, about employment, about poverty, about climate change, about lots of different things, people would have lots to say. And we need to be able to show what this sector is doing for the rest of the world, for researchers, for media, for all sorts of other sectors of society, so they can appreciate the full contribution of the social sector.
Great, thanks, Brad. That was really helpful framing. So I want to talk a little bit about our first year and change. We actually called our first annual report, It's Been a Year. And Elizabeth's going to paste the link to that and a bunch of other things, by the way, in the chat window so that you all can check it out while we're talking or after we're done. But really, it was a year. I would call it both exhilarating and exhausting in the same breath. And for us, it was really important to keep providing our essential services and resources as the year unfolded, in addition to doing all of that good work that you have to do during a merger of bringing two teams together. So Zohra, somehow we managed to still do a lot. Can you tell us a few things that we managed to launch in the last year?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, Jen. And you're right. It has definitely been a year and continues to be. I'll organize my response probably in three different buckets. One is new knowledge, a second is new tools, and the third one is new programming. So in our first year at Candid, we launched Investing in Native Communities, which is a website focused on philanthropic funding for Native American communities. We also launched Latinx Funders, which is a dashboard and a research project that documents foundation funding for the Latinx community. And then there was also Scholarships for Change, which is a website that explores and tracks how foundation donors are using scholarships to help accelerate the change that they hope to see in the world. And then with regards to the second bucket of new tools, there's a lot that we did, but I'll highlight that we unveiled the Nonprofit Startup Assessment Tool, which is a free 75-question online diagnostic survey that assists emerging nonprofits in assessing their readiness for actually starting a nonprofit. And also, it's a tool for early startups to understand what the building blocks are for developing a sustainable organization. And then the third bucket of new programs, a lot to share there again, but I'll highlight a couple of things. One of them is we continued building on our physical partner network, which is called the Funding Information Network. We lovingly, at Candid, we love acronyms, so we call them the FIN Network or the FINs. The year prior to merging as Candid, we had launched a two-tiered FIN partnership model. So much of our work in last year was continuing to build upon that. So in 2019, we accepted applications for new affiliates. These affiliates are oftentimes libraries, community foundations, and nonprofits across the globe that apply to be part of our network, and in turn, they offer access to our databases and resources to their local communities. Today, as a result of this pivot in the new model, we have 20 training partners, and we have nearly 380 access partners around the world. You can actually learn more about the FIN network by visiting the link that Elizabeth or Jen may have posted in the chat. And I also want to take this opportunity to spotlight our COVID-specific programming, which is most critical and relevant today. Candid has been known for a lot of its online programming, webinars, and self-paced courses. However, we have and will continue to provide programming to help guide nonprofits on how to best sustain their fund development efforts in the wake of COVID. What we've also done, in addition to COVID-specific programming, is we've shifted a significant portion of what were our in-person programs, for example, our signature proposal writing bootcamp and our cohort-based peer learning experiences, to a digital format. In all of these cases, we're seeing mass participation and a lot of positive feedback about the quality of the experiences and Candid's ability to pivot so quickly and meet people where they're at which right now is online.
Brad, it looks like you're talking, but you might have to go off.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in and just talk about some additional wins we had. One of which is sort of very geeky and back end, but something actually that gets our pulse running, which is we managed to merge together all of what are called enterprise resource planning systems. And this is the software systems that store all the millions of transactions, our accounting, our time allocation, our expense reporting. And I know this may not sound that exciting, but it was essential, given that for the first year, we were actually operating off two separate accounting systems, which we had to merge. We sort of had two of everything, actually, and in some cases, more than two of everything. And I think more importantly for everyone on the call, what this really does is it paves the way for us to serve stakeholders in an entirely different way. The other big win internally was GuideStar had originally coded or tagged all of its information according to what's called the NTEE, which is the National Taxonomy of Exempt Entities. And any of you who ever applied for a 501c3 status, you know that the federal government gives you a subject code, animal welfare, environment, health, whatever, and that's an NTE code. The Candid has a much richer and deeper philanthropy classification system, which is based on the NTE, but goes way beyond. What this is going to mean practically for users is that soon they're going to be able to search across all of Candid's information using natural language search terms by causes, by strategies, and population served. Not necessarily have to know the name or the EIN number of a specific organization they're interested in.
Thanks for adding that in, Brad. I think that you described some of this as geeky, so to speak, and I know a lot of our audience likes to geek out about these things too. So if you're someone who's interested in these things, we'll actually put a link to our taxonomy in the chat window so that you can geek out along with us. I'll put that in a second. But Sylvester, I want to bring you into the conversation. For me, as a middle manager, I was really, really impressed to see how our boards came together, both the board of GuideStar and Foundation Center. And Brad, you might have to go on mute because I think something's echoing. The board is just like such a dynamic group, and we're really lucky to have them steering Candid. So I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to how the boards came together and also like how it's been going. It's a lot to bring two staffs together, let alone two boards. So tell us about that.
Yeah, thanks, Jen, and appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's dialogue. In 2018, each of the two boards named two trustees to negotiate the high-level terms of engagement that resulted in the signing of an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding. With this MOU as the foundation, each of the two boards named 4 trustees to be part of a working group that we informally call the 4x4, the 4+4 group. This group reviewed what would become Candid's bylaws. We determined the structure of the board, determined how we established term limits for the trustees, and we also defined a process for selecting the chair and developed other agreements for working together. The 4x4 group agreed on the fact that the Candid board would be created simply by combining the GuideStar and the Foundation Center boards into one. We took the best of both organizations and their existing practices and came up with a hybrid model for the board meetings that started this year. And we decided we'll have 4 board meetings per year. Last month, Candid added 4 new trustees to our board. We now have 23 fantastic trustees on Candid's board, all who are committed to Candid's mission of getting people the information they need to do good. I've honestly been so amazed at the passion all the board members have for the bigger vision of helping accelerate the sector in service of society, and to see them put aside their interests for their legacy organizations in favor of united organizational vision has been absolutely inspiring for me. I was yet again reminded of this just 2 weeks ago when we had our virtual board meeting, where board members were undeniably just Candid, not Foundation Center, not GuideStar. As they engaged and they aligned around the exciting new vision, the strategic plan, and the organizational sustainability, during and beyond COVID times.
Wow, thank you for sharing all that. And I want to just share with our audience a quick anecdote. As a staff, we're not privy to a lot of the board meetings often, but it was really wonderful because our executive leadership actually posted a note from the board to the staff directly right after the board meeting. And they shared that on our Slack, which is our internal communication system. And I find that it's so rare to have such an engaged board that wants to acknowledge and connect with staff in that way. And as a staff team, we found it really powerful. So thank you, Sylvester. And also just want to share that as a great practice for any board members who might be in the audience. It goes a really long way. So let's actually switch gears a little to talk about challenges, because when we said it's been a year, part of that was that there were some challenges. So Brad, can you talk about some of the big challenges that we faced and what we did about them? Brad, I hate to ask you to unmute again.
Sorry, I haven't got the mute thing down. So, well, first of all, combining two organizations it's complex and it's costly. We have 11 different work stream groups, which are groups that cross-cut the organization, that are made up of folks that worked formerly with GuideStar, formerly or with Foundation Center, or completely new people that have joined us since we became Candid, that are working on key aspects of the integration. So we have an absolutely thrilling group that I know the listeners would love to be part of, which is the Accounting and Budgeting Systems Integration Group. It actually is really fascinating because the decisions we're making in that group will really affect the way the organization works for years. We have a group that's working on something called the Candid Data System, which is our sort of giant data warehouse that combines the data of both organizations. Very importantly, we have a group that's working on, we'll talk about a little bit about change management and culture, which is a really important part of any integration. We have a branding group. We have 11 of these groups that are working. A lot of these groups are working with outside consultants. The outside consultants are expensive. Those of you who worked with outside consultants, you know that the software that you purchase is always promised to do a million things, and the minute you flip the switch, it'll all work perfectly. We've found that it works well, but there are bugs, and we have to work through those. So there's a lot of expense involved in putting the organizations together, and a lot of sweat equity that's coming from the staff. So that's been a really important piece of it. The second thing is culture. This is what people always say about mergers and combinations, right? There's all these famous sayings that culture eats strategy for lunch and things like that. But really, organizational culture is probably the least tangible and one of the most important parts of making the integration of two organizations work. We came into this with, GuideStar had a view of the Foundation Center culture, and the Foundation Center had a view of the GuideStar culture. And both organizations were big enough that there was actually within each organization there were subcultures. So we needed to find a way to listen to those cultures and forge a new culture, which was a Candid culture. We did create a culture and change management group, which is a very active group that put together the values I talked about at the beginning. Does a lot of internal surveying of staff, put together a first all staff in-person meeting in Baltimore in October. It seems kind of incredible. We were actually all together in a big group of over 200 people in Baltimore, but we were, which was incredibly important. And that culture group continues to work. And I think now, where it was originally about combining two separate cultures, it's really much more now about building and deepening the Candid culture and helping people find community, and especially within that, because one of our really important values is diversity, equity, and inclusion. The second solution I want to talk about is just new Candid employees. You know, there's a way in which when you're putting two organizations together, if you're not careful, you look too much in the rearview mirror. You look too much about what was GuideStar, what was the Foundation Center. And, you know, if you're driving and you're looking too much in the rearview mirror, you might just run into something in front of you. And of course, what's happened over the past year is that we have new staff on. Currently, 15 to 20% of the staff at Candid is new to the organization since we joined forces in February of last year. And we have some board rotation going on. Sylvester mentioned we have 23 board members. We have 7 rotating off because we have term limits next year. So that will mean that almost a third of the board is completely Candid. And you cannot underestimate the importance of that. People who come onto the organization as Candid, because that's what they're joining. They're joining Candid. The last thing I'd mention is just, I think the branding exercise, and this was a big aha for me. I will admit that I had a somewhat skeptical view of branding exercises. I'd been through quite a bit of them, where basically we had consultants come in and we paid quite a bit of money for them, and basically they, you know, they learned about our organization and then sort of, you know, fed it back to us in an incomplete way. We had a really good group of outside branding consultants, a group called Open, and coming up with the Candid name and the Candid concept was incredibly important for us. It gave us the opportunity for organizations with 80 years of combined history to also have something of a new, fresh, and startup vibe. We couldn't escape being venerable, but we also, the world had to see us for a lot of what we are, which is a very modern, technologically, especially for this sector, advanced organization. Candid also had the power of going back to our very origins. About both organizations had an approach to information that this sector needed accurate, trusted information about what was going on in the sector, what was not going on, what it was achieving, and what it was not achieving. And Candid conveyed that in an incredibly strong way. And I remember when they first came up with this idea, we all sort of scratched our heads and said, well, wait a minute, you know, how can an organization be named an adjective? And then they began to mock up some of our existing products with it, like a lot of you know the GuideStar compensation report. And they mocked that up as the Candid report on nonprofit compensation. And we really began to see the power of this concept. And I think it really helped to bring us together under a new banner and a new image and a new, in some ways, but old ethos, which came from deeply within our DNA.
And that's right, Brad. And you know, there's one other challenge that I'll add into the mix. That is, you know, figuring out how Candid would be what it would stand for together. You know, and that was a piece that took some time as well. You together with some of the staff, you know, a small group of staff focused on this, Open helped, the brand consultants, and you did a really nice job in coming together with what we landed. But that does only go so far. The staff really have to identify with the brand. They have to start by living it. Your whole team is a part of the brand. So I like that when Candid launched, the brand work was in a sense unfinished because you had to allow for staff input in order to build upon it. Also, the culture piece you spoke of earlier was a really good challenge to raise. An important aspect to that is defining the values. What values should Candid staff live by and use to guide their work? To answer this, I like that you used a process that involved input from the entire staff with flexibility for iterations. As a result, I believe you and the team landed in a really great place, one that was also makes folks like myself and other board members real proud to get behind. The Candid values are as follows. They're driven, accessible, direct, curious, and inclusive. You know, check out the chat box now and read a little bit more about each of these values, because I think this is a lot more than just a headline of words, of course. And these values like inclusive, curious, direct are especially relevant in these times that we're going through as a country.
I'm glad you added that. I definitely love our values as well, and I have found them to be really helpful guiding principles in every aspect of our work. And in that vein, like, I've noticed us reflecting more actively as an organization. Like, we're pausing to actually think about what we've done, where we've been, and how to move forward. And then we're actually acting on like what we've reflected on. We're building it into how we work. So Zohra, what would you say some of our biggest lessons were in year one as a new organization?
We could probably write a book on lessons learned, but maybe I'll share about 4 or 5 of them. One, I would say use your board. So you've heard both from Sylvester and Brad about some of the upcoming shifts in our board based on term limits and us welcoming several new board members recently. Our board has been critical and will continue to be really critical in defining Candid's vision and how we work as one organization and how we deliver value to the sector broadly on a global scale. So number 1 is use your board. Number 2 is merging systems is a massive undertaking. Brad referenced earlier our business systems and accounting workstream group, and we've got about 11. I think at one time we had 12 or 13 different working groups that comprise of maybe about 80 different staff members tackling all of these issues. And so merging systems between our 2 organizations has been quite an endeavor, and collectively between the 2 organizations that came together, we had 46 different systems to sort through. We've made a lot of progress, but we still have quite a ways to go. So it's massive. Don't ever underestimate the amount of work that goes into it. A third lesson is build connections. And what I'm talking about here is building connections internally within staff. When you have staff that are based across the United States, and we also have some team members that are based in a couple of different pockets of the world, you have to learn how to operate and function with a remote team structure, and you have to spend time getting to know each other as human beings. I can speak for myself and maybe for some of you out there in the audience as well to say that many of us probably spend just as much time, if not more sometimes, with our work families as we do with our families at home. So connections are important on a human level because it makes progress less mechanical and much more enjoyable. So Candid had taken a lot of measures to create opportunities for people to get to know each other, such as Brad's reference of our first ever all-staff meeting in Baltimore last year. We've done, at local levels, we've done potlucks, and we do a lot of warm-ups at meetings, and we do happy hours, which in the wake of COVID have taken on a virtual format. And recently, I think it was just this week, our Spot of Friday activity, which happens every other Friday and brings together virtual or congregates staff around a virtual happy hour with different team members taking on playlists around different musical themes. Our Spot of Friday was recently featured in the Wall Street Journal. A fourth lesson is adopt an adaptability mindset. So flexibility, of course, is very much required by all, and it really does promote innovation and a smarter way of working. I can't even count the number of times that we at Candid have had to switch gears related to a project, an initiative, or a style of working. That nimbleness mindset has really helped to minimize stress. The stress is still there, but it's minimized the stress because you're always expecting the unexpected, which I would say would be the fifth lesson. So expect the unexpected. So there's always new opportunities. There's always roadblocks at every turn. And I think it's important for organizations to really acknowledge those with grace. An example is, of course, what's happening in the world today. Colleagues and I just in the last week have had to regroup and think through scaling back some of the planned messaging that we had carved out for this week because of what's happening in the world. And as an organization, we participated in the social media blackout yesterday in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. And then we've also updated our programming to address the unique situations that the coronavirus pandemic put us in, which I believe Brad is going to talk a little bit more about later on. And then I'll give you a fifth and final lesson, and that is that communication is key. For many of the reasons that I've already discussed, but communication both internally with staff and with external stakeholders is important, not only before change, but during change and after change. So those would be my 6.
Those are great learnings. And I think to pick up on that last one of communications, we kind of knew it was important. We relearned it, but we knew it was important. We were all just honestly so tired, and so much was in process that we also didn't want to keep communicating to you all that we're working on it. But this year, we're definitely committed to sharing more and to clarifying what we do and how we do it. One example is we started a visioning process for our future, and we'll officially launch that in the next couple of weeks or maybe next month. We'll launch it as the 2030 vision, and that vision is going to guide a lot of our work moving forward. So Sylvester, can you give some folks highlights of what they're going to be in that plan?
Yeah, Jen. Structurally, the social sector is changing. It's becoming bigger, more institutionally diverse, more professionalized, more empowered by technology. People within the social sector are wrestling with complex issues such as inequality, identity, impact, transparency, and a lot more. At Candid, we envision a social sector that's capable of tackling the critical challenges and opportunities of our time. Number one, people working for a better world have the trust and support of society at large by orienting their work to the public good, sharing information about it, and listening to their beneficiaries. Number two, organizations working for a better world would have access to the resources and skills they need, and in exchange, the organizations would be transparent and accountable. And the third is the social sector would reflect society as a whole. A cross-section of people from our incredibly diverse world would represent, serve, and lead these organizations. That's the vision we're having for the social sector. We've put a lot of work into the vision for 2030, and we're excited to put it into action. Also want to recognize our Executive Vice President, Jacob Harold, who led this process along with a staff of working group that brought it all to life. What's going to be particularly interesting as both board member and beneficiary of Candid's work, for me, it's really seeing how this plan gets operationalized. We're already starting to see some concrete steps taken, and I'm looking forward to more in the next weeks and months ahead.
So let's talk about some of those steps. And specifically, let's start with how we're strengthening our structure and our brand, since both of those enable us to operationalize program and product changes. Brad, can you start by talking briefly about how we reorganized our work?
Right. Well, first of all, we finally integrated all our teams. We made an early decision that we were going to keep all the different locations of both organizations as is. So that means we had physical offices, or we have physical offices in New York, Williamsburg, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Cleveland, and the Bay Area. And in some cases, we had a divisional structure where those teams were more or less sort of intact, aligned with their legacy organization. The new organization basically is a Candid organization that fully integrates all the teams across the organization. We also believe that the reorganization will help us better be able to serve nonprofits and foundations and doing the really important work they're doing in the world. And it helps us actualize something that Sylvester referred to, which is the 2030 vision that we'll be rolling out in the next several weeks or next month. 3 big shifts in this organizational structure. One is a networks team, and that's headed up by Zohra. This is really thought of as sort of an ecosystems context. It's really not based on the notion of funder, fundee, or funder grantee or donor donee relationships. It's really about the physical networks with which the Candid has direct interaction, either through live programming, online direct chat services, or customer service. It includes networks of community foundations, a nationwide network, the Funding Information Network of public libraries and other public-facing institutions that make our data tools available to the public. It includes a global partnerships group, which something we haven't talked that much about, but increasingly we're collecting data on the social sector around the world. And in many parts of the world, you don't have something like a 990 tax return. And the way you get that information is you forge partnerships with organizations on the ground. You exchange know-how on how to collect and structure information about the social sector for access to that information and the ability to publish it and make it available to the world. And this is incredibly important as it becomes more and more difficult to draw borders around problems. We need to have a global view of what this sector does. We also created a products division, and the thing about products is important. A lot of us think of products as something that you sell for money, but really what products are the best way that we have to deliver value at scale to people. And unless we're delivering value at scale, we're not fulfilling our mission. Sometimes those products are subscription products that are sold on a cash or a fee basis. Others are entirely free, others are highly subsidized. And the way I like to think of it is, my telephone, right? I'm sure all of you have downloaded tons of apps. There's about 5 on my home screen that I actually use, and there's probably about 30 somewhere to the right of my home screen that I hardly ever use. The ones I use is because they deliver value. They help me do something I need to do. And increasingly, that's the way we need to think about the products, whatever they may be, that Candid makes available to the world. The last thing I just want to talk about is that we're really aggressive about staff training. We learned some time ago that a really good C# or Python or JavaScript programmer or data spatial programmer that also understood the, how should I say it, the wonderful variety of the nonprofit and foundation sector was much more valuable to us than someone who just had the technical skills. So we started training internally, have been very successful. We trained more than 40 people in advanced programming skills, and they continue to improve their skills as they're improving their knowledge of the sector. We also have a program for the summer, something that is essential for the organization, I think any organization, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion training, which all the staff will undergo starting in the summer.
I'm looking forward to those things. And with our new structure, we're also in a much better place to keep strengthening and streamlining offerings. I think admittedly, more than 80 sub-brands coming together under one umbrella is daunting. It's daunting for us as staff, and it's certainly daunting for you all as our audience. And so more than daunting, it's also unfair to have you keep trying to navigate to find the information that you're looking for. So one of our top goals this year and in the next coming years is to really clarify our brand offerings so that they're easier for you to find and digest and access. So Zohra, can you give us a sneak peek of what's ahead on that front?
Sure, I can. And I'll also admit that I'm also looking forward to some of the streamlining, because as an ambassador of the organization, it will also make it easier for me to be able to direct people to the right tools and resources. So I think some folks may have already experienced this. I think that we've found that Candid team members frequently sound like we are coming from one, sometimes 2 or 3 different types of organizations versus one Candid. Of course, it is a little bit of a hurdle, and this does limit the effectiveness of our tools and our resources. Our primary audiences, which are nonprofit organizations and foundations, they're really, really busy, and they don't have time to go on a scavenger hunt for information. So we want to operationalize Candid's 2030 vision and plan in such a way that it makes it easier for people to get the information they need easily. So there really shouldn't be any hurdles. With that said, everything we do now is officially Candid. So it's not something from GuideStar or something from Foundation Center. You'll begin to see that our most popular web-based tools like Foundation Directory Online, which I may refer to as FDO, and GuideStar Nonprofit Profiles, they all fit under the umbrella of Candid. In addition to these core web tools, you'll also see visually as you're visiting our websites and different platforms that there are 3 updated avenues to benefit from Candid's resources and data. One of them is Candid Learning, which will include an aggregate of all of our educational resources aimed at helping people in the social sector improve their organizations. Another one is Candid News. It's a source of timely stories, intelligence, and perspectives for and by the people in our sector, as well as, of course, updates from Candid. And then there's also Candid Solutions, which helps folks navigate opportunities for tailored integrations with Candid, allowing platforms to address specific challenges through partnerships and through technology. Of course, none of this is going to happen overnight, but you will see some changes this year, some coming up very, very soon. Most of these changes will be to how information is organized versus the information itself. So, a couple of bullets under that for you to keep in mind. One of them is soon you'll see a new version of guidestar.org, and a new version of Foundation Directory Online will also be launched later this year. Candid Learning, which I just referred to, will officially launch very soon. And it's born from the in-depth resources of Grand Space, Grand Craft, and some of the educational content from Glass Pockets. If you're savvy on social media, you might have already picked up on some hints or seen some hints of that. And then with regards to Candid Solutions, it's already live with a full series of APIs, plugins, and custom data offerings. New integrations and enhancements are coming later in 2020, and then as we get into 2021. And then just yesterday, we launched a new visual design of Philanthropy News Digest, or PND, as some of you may call it, which now will be a launch pad for Candid News. So I know I've thrown a lot of information at you. What I would recommend to our audience is to just make sure that you're signed up for our newsletters and following us on social media, because there's a lot that's coming and we want to be able to update you in real time. Is that helpful, Jen?
Yeah, that's perfect. So I want to switch gears to talk about the coronavirus pandemic. From an employee standpoint, it was pretty cool how quickly our technology team really rallied to get everyone set up to work from home, and really we're plugging away like we've always done. But Brad, can you say more about how the pandemic is affecting our work at Candid?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Well, fortunately, we were, over the past 2 years, we had moved all of our data, business software, websites, and subscription tools to the cloud. So that combined with the fact that the overwhelming majority of people that we serve, our stakeholders and our users, access online, means that we were really poised to start working from home virtually. I mean, we had 2 small problems. One was we didn't have quite enough laptops for everybody, so we needed to purchase some extra laptops to make sure everybody had a laptop. And then, there are still customers and foundations that either pay us or make contributions by physical checks. And we needed someone to go into a couple of locations every once in a while and open envelopes and scan checks. But besides that, we were pretty much able to fully operate almost overnight with our infrastructure in the cloud. Programmatically, the challenge was, how do we help the sector respond to the COVID pandemic? And of course, the COVID pandemic was unfolding very quickly. So we didn't even have full understanding. We were paying attention to the same news that everybody else was. But we did have the sense that this was not something that was going to be over quickly, would be with us for some time. And as the economy began to fail, that would have severe impact on our sector. So virtually overnight, actually, a group of staff put up kind of what we inside refer to as a pop-up website. Our some of the staff that worked on it, they referred to it as being brutalist architecture. You know, it's not particularly pretty, it's not highly designed, but we got it up in about 48 hours. And another capability that we developed came in really handy, and that's the ability to track information about what's going on in our sector, essentially in real time. And I won't go into all the details about how we do that, but we use a lot of data science. We scan hundreds of thousands of news stories every day using machine learning tools. And there's other tools we use together with human labor and human intelligence to basically pull out of this huge stream of information how the sector is responding today, the funds that are being created, the new requests for proposals that are being out there, some of the big organizations and even the smaller organizations, they're getting grants to do really innovative work with COVID. We were able to put this out in a way that was quickly accessible to the field, and we saw a tremendous hunger for it. The data has been requested by some other sources, and we sort of piped it to them through APIs. There's been a lot of press coverage of this, but it was also something that we really want to do, which is at the heart of our 2030 vision. And that is be much more responsive to what people are worrying about and are concerned about and want to work on today. You know, the big problem with our existing databases was that if you'd gone into them and typed coronavirus, I think you would have found maybe 3 organizations that were nonprofits that were working on coronavirus because they were working with cats. And there's types of coronaviruses that cats get. So they were working on coronavirus and cats. If you looked at Foundation Director online, you probably wouldn't have found much of anything specific to coronavirus. So virtually overnight, we were able to create a whole stream, which is now over 11 or 12 billion dollars of funding around the world. That was new funding coming out for coronavirus. And for me, I have a global background. It was fantastic to watch. It was like watching the global philanthropic sector come on stream. The first data set was all coming from China. There was nothing from the US. Then it was Italy. Then it was the US, and of course the US, because of the size of the philanthropic sector, has far outstripped all the other countries. Now it's Brazil. So we're also seeing the way that the global philanthropic community responds to a crisis in real time. And that's something we want to be able to do more and more, because we think the future for our sector really requires that kind of information. We did a lot of other kinds of activities around this. We held special webinars. I think we had, Zohra can correct me, 2,500 or 3,500 participants in a webinar recently on how to move your event online. You know, great piece of information in today's world. We've done a lot of special trainings, a lot of special events, you know, how you fundraise in the era of COVID-19. And we've also been developing the ability to have expert insights. This is not the first, maybe the first pandemic most of us have lived through, but it's not the first financial crisis a lot of us lived through. So we looked back at our data and have published thought pieces and research pieces to show exactly what happened to the sector, both the donors, the foundations, and the nonprofit sector in past economic downturns, to say, you know, no, past performance is not a guarantee of future performance, but it is a good indicator of what is likely to happen, and maybe we don't need to panic as much as we think we might. And then lastly, we've worked on access. I mentioned the Funding Information Network previously, this network of over 400 organizations around the country, mostly public libraries, but other kinds of community organizations. They were offering physical access to our data tools at their locations. Well, in a COVID era where physical locations are closed, we were able to work out ways to extend online access to many of their members.
So before we move away from coronavirus talk, Brad, we got a question from our audience asking if we see Candid building more web pages like this in the future for other hot issues.
Definitely. Actually, and in relation to you know, what's going on in the country now, and in relation to the whole issue of police violence and police killings, we do have information that we collected in the past. We have an Issue Lab special collection that we'll share with you, which is 90 research reports, evaluations, and case studies about work that has been funded by foundations or carried out by nonprofits, specifically on race and policing. Another set of information about research reports, funding trends mapped on a GIS mapping platform for work that is specifically addressing problems and challenges faced by Black men and boys in America. And we have a racial equity page. What we're going to do starting very soon, within the next few days, is we're going to be putting on our main website and a number of our other properties, our other web properties that have the heaviest traffic where people will see it, access to this information, which we're going to be using the real-time skills that I talked about with coronavirus to update by the minute. we're beginning to see signs already that there's going to be a lot of activity, special funds being created, could be corporate social responsibility, foundation funding to address. It's not as simple as coronavirus. I mean, it's hard to think of coronavirus as being simple, but there's an intersection of issues which produce Minnesota. And we want to make sure that we're covering the kind of funding that is coming up and the new initiatives that are coming up specifically in response to the events that are sweeping the country today. So stay tuned for that.
Great, yeah, and to reiterate a point Zohra said earlier, please follow us on social media so that you see as soon as we launch this. Our Twitter handle is @candid.org, all written out. So Sylvester, we are so lucky to have you as our board chair, if I haven't said that already. And this question is as much a staff curiosity as it is for our audience. Can you share a bit about your background and experience and how you're bringing that to Candid in your role as board chair?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say that I'm the one that feels real lucky to be part of an organization with such a rich, diverse, and highly engaged board and executive management team. You know, not to mention the quality of the board chairs that came before me and their strong legacies, especially Clotilde Perez-Bud-Decker and Mari Karashi, you know, both of whom oversaw the organizational combination. As board chair, beyond my fiduciary functions, you know, in many ways, I see my role as a facilitator, a chief advocate, active enabler, a guardian of the organizational vision and its mission. And all of this is made much easier when an organization is as strong with great clarity of purpose as Candid is at this very time that we need them to be. You know, as it relates to my background and experiences, I'll simply put it in 3 buckets. You know, to start, I've had about 15 years of professional nonprofit organizational experience, including president and founder at various times, all levels in between as well. You know, this offers me some baseline understanding of the realities facing the social sector. And given I've also had extensive experience in nonprofit governance, social franchising, nonprofit mergers, impact measurement, and fundraising, all these serve me well in my role as a Candid board member. Secondly, I've spent the majority of my professional career in the international arena, having led a 46-country nonprofit network and personally established over half of them around the world. I've gained firsthand acute appreciation of the various nuances and societal circumstances facing different peoples. And I've lived and worked in 4 countries outside the US, including my native continent of Africa. These experiences have helped shape my perspectives and most definitely informs my contribution on the board today, especially as our ambitions are global. Finally, I've also had extensive corporate experience that includes vision development, strategy, organizational transformation, digital and product capabilities, data science, marketing, financial management, customer service, and more. As you can appreciate, these are all areas of importance to any strong organization, be it for-profit or nonprofit. And so I'm able to add value to the board as relevant. You'll find that all of the Candid's very diverse board members have similar or even stronger sets of experiences that they bring to bear in support of the organization's mission. The important focus for us all is service. We volunteer our time in service of others through Candid, and we take this responsibility very seriously. So let me just end by saying how much we appreciate all the staff at Candid, especially so many of you that are further removed from the board. We get regular updates of your work, and we want you to know that you're making a real difference. Our sector also has its equal weight and responsibility to do even more for social justice and race-related issues. Candid has its role to play here, and in that regard, I have no doubt that you're all up to the charge. And to our partners and stakeholders, especially those in the network division, including our funding information networks, We are in this together, and your collective actions are what makes the Candid flywheel work. We're here to serve you, and so please share feedback and hold us accountable to that. As goes the African Zulu phrase, Ubuntu, I am because we are. So Candid is because of your collective.
Oh, those are beautiful words for us to start wrapping up on. Thank you, Sylvester, for sharing with us. We're about at time, folks, so I want to again thank our incredible panelists, Sylvester, Zohra, and Brad. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Thank you for your leadership always. For our audience, thank you for being here. It means a lot that you showed up when there's so much else going on to learn more about what we're doing. We commit to keep communicating with you better, and you'll all get this recording in your inbox tomorrow. So thank you again, and we wish you really well. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.